People in Brentwood don't like talking about strange things, especially not about the small Spanish-style house on Helena Drive where Marilyn Monroe spent her last weeks. But when Daniel and Lila Morgan bought the property, they expected old Hollywood charm, not what followed. The hook of the story happened on their very first night. They weren't superstitious. They didn't even think about Marilyn except as a historical footnote until something so specific, so odd, so grounded in real evidence, made them pause. It wasn't a shadow, not a sound, nothing dramatic. It was the thermostat. At 2:43 a.m., the hallway thermostat suddenly clicked on, switching the heating system to exactly the same temperature written on an old maintenance note the previous owner had left taped inside the panel. 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Marilyn liked it warmer at night. The house was empty. No timers, no schedules. Daniel double-checked it wasn't smart, it wasn't programmable, it wasn't even digital. Just an old mechanical dial. There was no reason it should have moved, especially not from 62 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to the exact number written in handwriting that had faded over decades. That detail disturbed him more than if he had seen a shadow. The next day they mentioned it casually to the neighbor across the street, an elderly woman named Mrs. Lopez who had lived there since the 70s. She didn't look surprised. She didn't comfort them either. She just said something quiet, almost like advice. If the house warms up at night by itself, don't walk the hallway. She used to pace when she couldn't sleep. It sounded like an old woman's superstition, nothing more. But the more nights they spent there, the more the Morgans noticed something they couldn't explain. Subtle things, always subtle. Soft steps, not heavy enough to be a person, but too deliberate to be pipes. The faint scent of Chanel No. 5, drifting down the hall even when the windows were closed. A cabinet door gently swinging open around 3-4 a.m., always the same one, always just an inch. And once, a flash of light caught in the mirror, not bright but soft, like someone stepped past with a vanity bulb reflection. Nothing frightening, nothing cinematic, just wrong enough to feel like the house remembered someone. Daniel tried testing everything. He checked the ducts. He watched the thermostat. He taped the cabinet shut one night so he'd know for sure if it opened. At 3:12 a.m., the tape peeled itself away smoothly, not snapped or torn. He sat awake until morning, staring at the hallway that everyone said Marilyn once paced during bouts of insomnia. By the end of the first week, Lila started writing down every small thing. Not out of fear, out of pattern tracking. She was a rational person, a scientist. She needed data. But the list kept getting longer. And the strangest part? The house didn't feel evil, didn't feel heavy, felt sad. Almost like someone wandering through their own memories, unsure where to rest. It was only on the 8th night that something unmistakably personal happened, something that would convince both of them that Marilyn's presence wasn't just a story or neighborhood rumor. Because on that night, they found a lipstick print light, faded, perfect on the hallway mirror. A shade neither of them owned. A shade identical to the vintage Revlon cherries in the snow Marilyn was known to use. And the imprint wasn't smudged. It wasn't sliding. It wasn't melting from heat. It was fresh. Daniel didn't wake Lila at first. He just stood in front of the hallway mirror, staring at the lipstick mark like he was afraid it would vanish if he blinked. The house was silent behind him, holding its breath. Even the refrigerator, which usually hummed all night, seemed to quiet itself. Only the soft rustle of leaves outside the open bedroom window broke the stillness, as if the world continued moving while the house had paused around him. He leaned closer. The lipstick wasn't smeared, wasn't aged or dusty. It had the faint shimmer of oil still drying on the glass, the same way someone's kiss looks just minutes after being pressed there. His hand hovered over it but didn't touch. Something about the print felt too personal, like stepping into a room right after someone had cried in it. Lila's footsteps approached slowly, bare, soft, hesitant because she knew her husband well enough to sense when something wasn't right. When she saw him standing rigid in the dim yellow glow of the hallway night light, she didn't speak. Her eyes followed his line of sight straight to the mirror. She froze. "What is that?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. Daniel didn't turn. "You didn't put this here." "No," she breathed. "And that color, it's vintage," he finished. The next 30 seconds stretched like a slow inhale. He could hear her breathing change, shallow at first, then steadier as she gathered herself. Lila wasn't someone who jumped to conclusions. She moved through the world with a scientist's skepticism. But even skepticism has limits when the evidence stands inches from your face. She reached up, finally, and touched the edge of the mirror, not the lipstick, just the cold glass beside it. A chill pulsed through her fingertips. Not cold from temperature, but cold like stepping into a basement where the air hasn't moved in decades. "It's warmer here," she murmured, sliding her hand until it hovered near the lipstick mark. "Feel it." Daniel touched the mirror beside her hand. The glass was cool. Then he moved closer to the print. Warm. He pulled his hand back like he'd touched a pulse. Something had pressed against that mirror. Recently, they didn't sleep the rest of the night. They sat at the small kitchen table, wrapped in thin blankets, a single lamp illuminating a circle of warmth in an otherwise quiet room. Outside, Los Angeles glowed faintly behind the palm trees, the distant hum of cars reminding them they weren't entirely alone, though the house itself felt like it had slipped into its own timeline. Lila found her notebook again, the one she had started on the third night, and added a new bullet point: lipstick print on hallway mirror. Fresh, warm to the touch. When she put her pen down, she said something she hadn't dared to say aloud yet. "This doesn't feel like a haunting in the way people imagine it. It's like someone is walking through habits, familiar paths, doing the things they did when they lived." Daniel nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "Or we're losing it." She closed the notebook. "Both of us? In the same way? At the same time?" He didn't answer. Around 5 a.m., when a pale blue dawn began to seep through the curtains, the house shifted again. Another small, subtle movement that somehow hit harder than anything before. Their bedroom door, which had been closed, was now open just a crack. Only an inch, like someone had nudged it gently with the back of their hand. Daniel stood and approached it cautiously, his feet cold against the hardwood floor. He pushed the door fully open and looked down the hallway. The thermostat dial, left at 68 degrees, clicked again. It moved upward, slowly, precisely, to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Lila stepped beside him. Her voice barely rose above a breath. "That was her favorite on filming days," she said. "They kept sets warm so the makeup wouldn't crack." He stared at the dial. "How do you know that?" "I used to read everything about her. I know the small things." Daniel exhaled, long and shaky. "So what is this, then? A residual loop? Emotional imprint? Something trapped in the walls?" Lila didn't blink. What if she just never left? For the first time since moving in, Daniel looked deeper down the hallway, past the mirror, past the thermostat, past the old mosaic archway at the end. The sunlight hadn't reached that far yet, and the shadows held their corners tightly. He thought he saw a shape there. Not a figure, not a ghost, just a faint outline, like the air thickened in one spot, dense with memory. He blinked and it dissolved. But the feeling didn't. The hallway felt lived in, used, watched. Behind him, Lila whispered something almost too quiet to hear. "Daniel, the scent. Do you smell it?" He inhaled. A faint floral sweetness drifted through the hall. Light, elegant, iconic. Chanel No. 5. Again. But this time stronger. As if someone had just passed through. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. For the next few days, the house behaved in small, unsettling ways, barely their movements. Pockets of warm air where the architecture had no reason to hold heat. A soft perfume drifting at odd hours. Nothing violent. Nothing threatening, but every odd detail, every shift in temperature, pushed Daniel and Lila deeper into a strange emotional territory between skepticism and quiet dread. By the fourth morning, Lila started mapping the house literally. She drew a floor plan and marked circled areas: thermal anomalies, sound clusters, mirror incident, door movement, perfume trail. She'd never intended to become a paranormal investigator. Yet the house pulled her into a role she didn't entirely understand, and all her circles kept redirecting to one part of the house, the small guest room at the back. It was the only room they hadn't set foot in since they moved in. Something about it had felt wrong from the start, not dangerous, just emotionally heavy, the way an untouched childhood bedroom feels after someone's death. The previous owner had kept it locked, claiming it was just storage, but the key had been left on a brass hook near the kitchen, as if he couldn't bear to carry it away with him. Lila stood in front of the door that afternoon, holding the old key between her fingers. Sunlight pooled across the floor, but the bottom of the door remained in shadow, no matter how bright the hallway became. Daniel hovered behind her, uncertain. "We should check it," Lila said quietly. "Everything circles back here." Daniel hesitated. "What if we regret opening it?" She glanced at him with steady, analytical eyes. "We already regret not understanding what's happening. Ignoring something never makes it go away." She slipped the key into the lock. It turned too easily, like the mechanism had been oiled recently even though the room had supposedly been untouched for years. The door opened with a soft, tired groan. A stillness poured out, not cold, but almost expectant. The room was small, simple, dusty but oddly preserved. Pale sunlight filtered weakly through sheer curtains. A narrow iron bed frame leaned against the wall. Old built-in shelves held a few abandoned objects. A cracked picture frame, a single vintage hair clip, an old lamp without a bulb. Nothing supernatural, nothing dramatic. And yet the moment they stepped inside, both of them felt it at once. A quiet pressure behind the ribs, a heaviness like walking into a memory that didn't belong to them. Lila walked toward the shelves. Her fingers drifted over dust-covered wood until she paused at the cracked frame. She lifted it gently and brushed the glass. Inside was a faded photograph of the house, specifically the backyard patio taken decades ago. The edges were curled, the colors washed out, but the date stamped on the back was unmistakable. July 1962, the month Marilyn died. Lila turned the frame toward Daniel. "This shouldn't be here." He stared at the photo. In the corner of the image, so subtle that the low contrast nearly consumed it, was the faint silhouette of a woman walking toward the patio steps. Blonde hair catching the light, head slightly bowed. Lila's voice lowered. "Do you think?" "No," Daniel said too quickly. No, it's probably just the previous owner's relative." "Then why hide it?" she asked, her tone soft but pointed. He had no answer. Suddenly a small draft slid across the back of Daniel's neck, not air from the hallway, but from inside the room itself, as if someone had brushed past him. He turned sharply. Nothing moved, but he noticed something he hadn't seen before. In the far corner, just above the floor, the wallpaper seemed slightly discolored, like a rectangle of brighter paint underneath, as if something had once hung there for years. He crouched and touched the edge of the wallpaper. The adhesive was dry and fragile. When he pressed lightly, a corner flaked off, falling to the floor like a brittle petal. Behind it was a small patch of handwriting. Faint pencil. Feminine cursive. "Sometimes I feel most myself when no one is watching." Lila knelt beside him, her breath catching. The handwriting was delicate, almost familiar in a way they couldn't explain. It was the kind of sentence a lonely person writes when they're trying to remind themselves they still exist. Daniel swallowed hard. Someone wrote this during the Reconstruction years. It can't be. A soft sound cut him off. A gentle tap, like a finger knocking lightly on glass. They both turned slowly toward the window. The sheer curtain fluttered not outward, but inward, toward a breeze that didn't exist. Then they heard it again. Another tap, precise, rhythmic, like someone lightly touching the window from the inside. Lila rose first, moving toward the curtain, each step measured. Daniel followed, slower. She drew the curtain back in one smooth motion. Nothing outside, but on the inside of the glass, another faint lipstick print. Same shade, same placement height as the one on the mirror. But this one was smeared slightly at the corner, as if whoever left it had turned away too quickly. Lila whispered, barely audible, "She came here. This room. This is where she hid when things were too loud." Daniel stared at the print. "Why show it to us now?" Lila exhaled. "Maybe she wants someone to see the pieces no one looked at." Behind them, the door they'd entered through clicked. Slowly, softly, closing itself. Not fully shut, just enough to remind them they were not alone in the room. The door's soft click settled into the room like a whispered punctuation mark. Daniel and Lila stood very still, listening to the quiet that felt almost conscious. The air in the small guest room felt heavier now, but not suffocating, more like stepping into someone's unfinished thought. Daniel reached for the doorknob instinctively, but Lila placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Wait," she murmured. "She's not trying to trap us." He hesitated, uncertain whether she was speaking from logic or intuition. But he released the knob. They both turned back to the window, where the faint lipstick print glowed softly in the late afternoon light. Lila stepped closer. The warmth around the glass, just like the hallway mirror, felt unmistakably human. Not residue, not climate, contact. She whispered into the room, barely audible. "Marilyn, what are you trying to show us?" Silence answered her for a long, long moment. The kind of silence that stretches into your attention and sharpens it. Then slowly one thing changed. The lamp on the built-in shelf, the one without a bulb, flickered. Just once. A soft glow, impossible, like a flashlight dying at the end of its batteries. Daniel gasped. Lila didn't move. She watched the lamp with calm, focused attention. "It's the only object here that belonged to her era," she said. "The rest looks newer. But this lamp, this might have been here when she was alive." Daniel swallowed. "So what is she doing? Reaching out? Repeating a memory? Is this intelligent or residual?" Lila said nothing. She walked to the lamp and knelt, touching the metal base. It was warm. The warmth wasn't frightening, it was intimate, like touching something that had been held for a long time. Her fingers traced the edges until she felt a small, raised ridge, almost like a seam. She pressed it lightly. Tiny click. A thin metal plate at the base slid open, revealing a hollow compartment inside. Both of them leaned in. Inside the compartment was a folded piece of yellowed stationery reel paper, brittle with age, preserved by the sealed metal. Lila lifted it carefully, as if the paper might crumble at her breath. The letter was short, just a few lines, written in delicate cursive. "Sometimes I feel like the world loves the idea of me, but not who I am when the cameras stop. If anyone ever finds this, please remember me as a person, not a picture. No signature, no date, but the handwriting." Even Daniel recognized it. Lila touched the page as if touching a heartbeat. "She hid this," she whispered. "She didn't want anyone in her life to find it. This was for someone else. For someday. For the house." The air behind them moved soft, like a sigh. They turned. The figure did not appear. No shape, no apparition. But the perfume. Chanel No. 5 filled the room so suddenly and so fully, it was like stepping into the middle of someone's slow, graceful spin. Daniel felt his eyes burn. Not from fear, from something sadder. A tenderness he didn't expect. He whispered into the soft air. "We see you." The perfume lingered, held, then slowly faded. Lila folded the letter back into its compartment, resting it inside the lamp with a care that felt ceremonial. "Let her keep it," she said. "It was never meant for the world." Daniel nodded. As they stood, preparing to leave the small room, they both felt the same subtle tug, something urging them to pause at the door. They looked back one last time. The sunlight had shifted. A beam now angled perfectly across the wall where the faded handwriting had been revealed earlier. The words glowed faintly, the pencil strokes warming in the golden light. "Sometimes I feel most myself when no one is watching." This time, though, the handwriting looked different. Sharper, clearer, as if freshly traced. Like someone had rewritten it moments ago. A soft warmth passed through the room, brushing Daniel's shoulder like a hand in farewell. Lila felt the same warmth at her cheek, like a breath. They left the room slowly, pulling the door behind them. It didn't resist this time. It closed with a gentle, natural thud. And the moment it shut, the house exhaled. No more footsteps that night. No perfume. No movement. No warmth in odd places. Just silence. Ordinary domestic silence. Clean and still. For the first time since moving in, the house felt empty, but not abandoned. At breakfast the next morning, Lila said quietly, "I think she just needed someone to acknowledge her. Not the legend, not the icon, just her." Daniel looked toward the hallway. "Do you think she's gone?" Lila shook her head slowly. "Not gone. Resting. Settled." They stayed in the house another year. Nothing strange ever happened again. The thermostat stayed still. The mirrors stayed clean. The air smelled only of jasmine from the backyard. But every so often, in late afternoon light, the small guest room's door would drift open a couple centimeters as if someone inside preferred it that way. Never more. Never less. Just a quiet reminder that the house had once held a life too bright, too fragile, too watched. And now, finally, she wasn't alone.